A photograph is supposed to freeze a happy memory in time, but sometimes a camera captures the exact terrifying moment right before someone vanishes forever. Today, we're covering 10 disturbing disappearance cases with chilling last photos. If you love deep dives into the mysteries, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and give hype points. It really helps us out. Now, dim the lights, look closely at the background, and let's get into it. There's a piece of 16mm documentary footage shot in 1969. It shows a long wooden canoe gliding down a muddy river deep in the jungles of New Guinea. Inside the canoe, dozens of Asmat warriors are rowing in perfect, synchronized unison. But if you pause that footage, if you slow it down, if you really look at the back of the boat, there's a white man in there, naked, bearded, rowing with the same rhythm as the rest of the warriors. 8 years earlier, the heir to one of the largest fortunes in American history had vanished off that exact stretch of coastline. This is the case of Michael Rockefeller, and it is, without question, one of the most surreal disappearances of the 20th century. November 1961. The Asmat region of what was then called Dutch New Guinea. Today we call it the Indonesian province of South Papua. If you have ever wanted to know what the absolute edge of the world feels like, this is it. The Asmat coastline is one of the most hostile environments on Earth. We are talking about a low, swampy delta where dozens of rivers braid together before pouring into the Arafura Sea. The tides are violent and unpredictable. The rivers are full of saltwater crocodiles, some of them well over 15 feet long. The mud is so thick it can swallow a man up to his waist. The mosquitoes carry malaria. The mangroves form an impenetrable green wall along the shore. And then there are the people who live there. In 1961, the Asmat were a barely contacted Stone Age culture. They did not have writing. They did not have metal. They did not have currency. What they had was a deeply elaborate spiritual and artistic tradition, and a very real, very active practice of ritual headhunting and cannibalism. This was not folklore. This was not exaggeration. The Asmat believed, in a deeply held cosmological sense, that the death of one of their own had to be balanced by the taking of an enemy's head. It was how the spiritual books were kept. It was how the ancestors were honored. It was how the universe was rebalanced. You did not stroll casually into Asmat territory. You did not extend a friendly handshake. The line between guest and prey was thinner than any Westerner could really comprehend. Now into this world walks a 23-year-old American. His name is Michael Rockefeller. And to be clear, this is not just any 23-year-old. Michael's father, Nelson Rockefeller, is the sitting governor of New York. His great-grandfather, John D. Rockefeller, founded Standard Oil and became, depending on how you measure it, the richest American who ever lived. Michael is, quite literally, an heir to one of the most powerful fortunes the modern world has ever produced. He could be doing anything with his life. He could be in a Manhattan office. He could be on a yacht in Monaco. He could be sitting on the boards of museums and never lift a finger again as long as he lived. Instead, he is here, in the mud. Michael had developed a deep fascination with anthropology while he was at Harvard. He had worked as a sound engineer on a famous ethnographic film about tribal warfare in New Guinea. He had become obsessed with Asmat art, particularly the towering carved ancestor poles called Biscay poles, which the Asmat carved as part of mourning and revenge rituals. Michael wanted them. Not as a thief, exactly. He believed he was buying them, trading axes and tobacco for ceremonial objects, intending to bring them back to a museum his father was building. He was idealistic. He was educated. He was genuinely interested in the people he was meeting. But he was also, by most accounts, dangerously naive about the realities of the place. He believed that his money, his cameras, and his Western standing made him fundamentally untouchable. That belief was about to be tested. On November 17, 1961, Michael set out on a small expedition with a Dutch anthropologist named René Wassing. They were traveling in a makeshift catamaran, basically two large dugout canoes lashed together with planks powered by an outboard motor. It was loaded with their gear, their cameras, and the artifacts they had recently traded for. They were chugging across an open stretch of river mouth where it dumps into the Arafura Sea. And then the motor died. That, by itself, was a manageable problem. Boats break down all the time, but out here, with no radio, no nearby villages, and no way to signal for help, a dead motor in open water meant the tides were now completely in charge, and the tides were brutal. Within hours, the swells were big enough to swamp the catamaran. Water poured in, the boat overturned. Their gear, their food, their dry clothes, almost all of it sank or floated away. Michael and Renee clung to the underside of the overturned hull. They were now miles from shore, drifting at the mercy of the current, in shark and crocodile waters, completely alone. They spent a long, terrifying night clinging to that hull. By morning, the boat had drifted further out, but the distant green smudge of land was still visible. And here, Michael made a decision that would echo for the next 60 years. He looked at Renee, and he said the line that has become almost unbearable to read in retrospect. "I think I can make it." He stripped off most of his clothes, down to his underwear. He took 2 empty red plastic jerry cans, gasoline containers, basically waterproof floats, and he tied them to a belt around his waist. He pushed off from the hull, and he started swimming for the distant shore. Renee begged him not to, yelled at him to stay, reminded him of the sharks, the crocodiles, the distance. Michael was a strong swimmer. He had been a competitive swimmer in college. He believed in his own body. He believed in the trajectory of the current, which appeared to be carrying things toward shore, not out to sea. So he swam. And Renee watched him grow smaller and smaller and smaller, until he vanished into the heat haze. Hours later, search planes, alerted by the family back home, finally spotted the overturned catamaran and rescued Renee from the hull. But Michael was gone. What followed was one of the largest international search operations of the era. The Rockefeller family deployed every resource they had. The U.S. government and the Dutch colonial administration coordinated with helicopters, naval vessels, and thousands of local searchers combing the coast and the rivers, day after day, week after week. Nothing. No body, no clothing, no jerry cans, no trace. Michael Rockefeller was officially declared lost at sea. Now, fast forward 8 years, 1969. An independent American filmmaker and a journalist traveled into the Asmat region to make a documentary. They were partly investigating the rumors that had been swirling around for years, rumors that Michael had not, in fact, drowned, that something else had happened to him on that muddy beach. While they were filming, they captured a long stretch of B-roll showing Asmat warriors paddling massive wooden war canoes down a river. The shot is a wide one. Dozens of bodies in the boat, all rowing in unison, the camera tracking from the riverbank. When that footage was later analyzed, frame by frame, and most famously when it resurfaced in a 2007 documentary about Michael, viewers spotted something that made the air go still. In one of the canoes, toward the rear, rowing in lockstep with the rest of the warriors, was a man whose skin was unmistakably, jarringly white. He had dark, full hair, a heavy beard. He was naked, like the others around him. He was matching their motion exactly, as if he had been doing this for years. He is on screen for only a few fleeting frames. The footage is grainy. The light is unkind. The image is not crystal clear. But it is there. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now let's pull this apart because the official story has a lot of holes. The Dutch authorities almost immediately ruled the case as a drowning. Michael had swum into open tropical waters. There were sharks, there were crocodiles. He must have died somewhere between the catamaran and the shore. It is a sanitized, convenient explanation, and it has problems. Michael was an exceptional swimmer. We're not talking about a casual paddler. He had genuine endurance training. He also had 2 empty plastic jerry cans tied to his waist. Bright red, bright orange, hard plastic. Even if his body had been taken by a shark or a crocodile, those cans would have been buoyant for years. The current at that time of day was pushing things toward the shore, not out to sea. If the cans drifted free, they should have washed up somewhere along that coastline. They never did. Not one. Not ever. Not in any of the searches over the following decades. That is the first logic gap. The drowning theory cannot fully account for the absolute, total absence of any debris. Now, let's talk about the second theory, the one the Dutch colonial government actively suppressed at the time. A few years before Michael's death, in 1958, A Dutch military patrol had visited a particular Asmat village called Otsenep. There was an altercation. The Dutch patrol opened fire. They killed several of the village's most important leaders, 5 men whose deaths created a cosmic, spiritual debt in the eyes of the entire community. In Asmat tradition, those deaths had to be balanced. The blood of an enemy had to be taken. And here is the crucial part. In the Asmat worldview, the white men were not separate individuals. They were members of one large foreign tribe. Any white man would do. Any white man who came within reach was a potential offering to settle the spiritual scales. In November 1961, Michael Rockefeller, exhausted, stripped to his underwear, defenseless, alone, dragged himself onto the muddy bank near, by some accounts, that exact same village. Years later, journalist Carl Hoffman would spend months in the region, learning the language, building trust, and what he gradually uncovered through whispered local accounts was a deeply consistent story. Michael had reached the shore. He had been pulled from the water. He had been killed in a ritual act of revenge. His remains had been distributed among the warriors of the village. There is also a chilling artifact. In 1962, a Dutch patrol officer was reportedly handed a skull by villagers. The skull had a small puncture mark in the temple, an unmistakable hallmark of Asmat ritual treatment of the dead used to extract the brain. The Dutch colonial authorities, by all accounts, made that report quietly disappear. They did not want a diplomatic catastrophe with one of the most powerful families in the United States. Local elders, decades later, were still terrified to speak about it. One of them, when finally asked directly by a foreign visitor, allegedly pantomimed the and then warned the visitor that telling the story aloud would bring death to him and his family. They believed the act had brought a cholera epidemic upon their village in the years after as divine punishment for such a powerful spirit. That story is hard to walk away from. But then, there is the footage. And the footage opens a third door. The skeptics will tell you the man in the 1969 canoe is just a trick of overexposed film, or an albino Asmat tribesman, or a missionary who happened to be visiting, or a different Western anthropologist passing through. All of those are possible. But it is also possible that Michael Rockefeller did not die that day on the beach, that instead, against all odds, the heir to the largest fortune in American history made it to shore, was taken in by the Asmat in some way that did not end in ritual, and chose, out of trauma or guilt or a strange kind of liberation, to never go home. To trade his name, his money, his Manhattan future for a life of paddling a war canoe down a muddy New Guinea river. It would, in its own way, be the most extreme act of self-erasure imaginable. Despite the immense wealth and political power at the family's disposal, the Rockefellers were eventually forced to accept the awful, ambiguous truth. There was no body to bury. There was no closure to be had. In 1964, Michael was officially declared legally dead, and a death certificate was issued without any physical remains. His father, Nelson, went on to serve as the Vice President of the United States. He carried his son's absence with him to his own grave. The rumors never went away. Every few years, another book would come out, another documentary would be filmed, another expedition would venture into the Asmat region to pull at the thread. Some came back with whispered confirmations of a ritual. Others came back with hints, glances, and that uncanny feeling that the locals knew far more than they were ever going to say out loud. But nobody ever produced Michael, not alive, not dead, just stories. And one piece of grainy 1969 film footage that looks, just for a few seconds, like a ghost rowing among warriors. A billionaire's son believed he was untouchable. He believed his education, his money, and his good intentions made him a guest in a place that had no concept of guests. He stripped to his underwear, tied 2 jerry cans to his waist, told another man, "I think I can make it," and swam into the muddy delta. What happened on that beach, whether he was in a ritual act of revenge for a Dutch massacre he had nothing to do with, or whether he survived and chose to vanish into a culture that the rest of the world considered the very edge of civilization, is one of the great unsolved questions of the 20th century. Somewhere out there, in the silt of an Indonesian river, or in the carved memory of an old Asmat warrior, the truth is buried. And every time that 1969 canoe rolls past on the screen, with that strange white figure rowing in unison with the rest, the question rises again. Did Michael Rockefeller die that day, or did he simply choose to never come home? There are 90 photographs that nobody can fully explain. They were taken in the dead of night, in the middle of a Panamanian jungle, 8 days after 2 Dutch tourists vanished off the face of the earth, and when investigators finally got their hands on the camera that took them, they found something that has divided the internet for over a decade. This is the case of Kremers and Froon. And by the end of this video, I want you to ask yourself one simple question. Does the official story actually add up? Pour yourself something strong, because we're going into the dark. Boquete, Panama, April 1st, 2014. It's a postcard-perfect morning in a mountain town that tourists fall in love with the second they arrive. The air's cool, the sun is bright, the streets are dotted with little cafes and Spanish schools and backpackers in flip-flops, drinking strong coffee out of ceramic cups. Boquete sits in the Talamanca Highlands, a region famous for its lush green ridges, its waterfalls, and its trails that wind up into the cloud forest. The most popular of those trails is called El Pianista, the pianist. It's named for the way the dark and light streaks of vegetation on the mountainside look like piano keys from a distance. Locals hike it, tourists hike it. It's a pretty standard day trip up to a viewpoint they call El Mirador, where you can see all the way out toward the Caribbean side of the Continental Divide. But here's the thing about El Pianista. It's perfectly safe up to the summit. Past the summit, it's a different planet. Past the summit, you're descending into one of the densest, most disorienting cloud forests in Central America. We're talking knee-deep mud, steep ravines that drop 100 feet straight down, rivers that flood without warning. A canopy so thick that GPS signals die and cell towers may as well not exist. Locals know not to go past the Mirador without a guide. Tourists, very often, do not. And on this particular sunny April morning, 2 young women named Kremers and Froon are about to make exactly that mistake. Let me tell you about them. Chris is 21, Lisanne is 22. They're best friends from the Netherlands, smart, energetic, recently graduated. They've come to Panama for a 6-week working holiday, to volunteer with local kids, to learn Spanish, to live a little before adult life kicks in. They're not survivalists. They're not mountaineers. On the morning they set off, they're wearing shorts, tank tops, light sneakers. They have a single shared backpack between them. Inside, 2 phones, a digital camera, a water bottle, some snacks, 2 bras, and about $87 in cash. That's it. That is the entirety of what they're carrying into the cloud forest. Around 11 in the morning, they head out. A local restaurant dog tags along with them, the way these jungle dogs sometimes do, running ahead, doubling back, leading the way. The early photos on their camera show them laughing, smiling at the lens, drinking water, pointing at little flowers. It's the kind of vacation footage that makes you want to book a flight to Central America. By around 1 p.m., they reach the summit, El Mirador. There's a famous photo here. The 2 of them side by side, the dramatic green ridges stretching out behind them. They look happy, they look healthy. They look like 2 best friends having the time of their lives. And then, they keep walking. This is the moment. This is where everything fractures, because the next photos on the camera show them descending past the summit into that dense, unmarked, dangerous jungle on the other side of the divide. Maybe they thought the trail looped back. Maybe they were chasing the dog. Maybe they just wanted a better view. Whatever the reason, they crossed the line. And then, the dog turned around and went home, without them. By 4:39 p.m., just hours later, the first emergency call is attempted from Chris's phone, 112, the European emergency number. It fails, no signal. 12 minutes after that, at 4:51 p.m., another attempt, this time on Lisanne's phone, 911, also fails, so now we know. Within hours of stepping off that summit, these 2 girls are in serious life-threatening trouble. They are calling for help, and help cannot reach them. For the next several days, a haunting pattern emerges from the phone records. They turn the phones on briefly, check for signal, turn them off to conserve battery, try again the next day, and the next, and the next. For 10 weeks, that's all anyone knows. The girls are gone. Massive search efforts kick off. Helicopters, dogs, volunteer teams, nothing. Just dense green jungle in every direction. And then, a local indigenous woman, washing rice by a riverbank deep in the jungle on the other side of the mountain, sees something blue. She picks it up. It's a backpack. Lisanne's backpack. When investigators open it, they find a quiet little time capsule. Both phones, cash, sunglasses, the 2 bras neatly folded, Lisanne's passport, a water bottle, and a digital camera. That camera is going to change everything. When forensic investigators downloaded the SD card, they found something nobody was prepared for. For the first week of the disappearance, the photos make sense. Daytime hike pictures, the summit, the descent, a few unremarkable shots of the jungle floor. Then, nothing for several days, just digital silence. And then, on the night of April 8th, 8 full days after the girls had vanished, the camera came back to life. Between roughly 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., in the absolute dead of night, in the pitch-black heart of the jungle, someone took over 90 photographs in rapid succession. Now I need you to picture this. It's not video. It's not a sequence with context. It's 90 individual flash photos, each one a single frozen blast of light into total darkness, separated by intervals of a few seconds to a few minutes. What do they show? Mostly they show nothing. Or rather, they show fragments of nothing. Wet leaves, dark trees, a jagged rock face, the edge of a stream, mud, sticks. But scattered throughout the sequence are images that have been studied frame by frame for over a decade. There's a photo of a small mound of toilet paper, neatly arranged on top of a wet rock. There's a photo of a tree branch with a clear plastic bag tied to it, like some kind of strange marker. There are photos of what appears to be torn candy wrappers laid out in patterns. And then there's the one that nobody can stop talking about. A close-up shot, taken from behind, of the back of a head. The hair's reddish blonde, slightly tangled, wet. It's Chris. Her hair's unmistakable. The framing is tight. The angle is low. She's facing away from the camera, into the darkness. Who took that photo? If Lisanne took it, why? Why photograph the back of your friend's head in the middle of the night, in a jungle, when you've already burned through most of your battery? Why is Chris not turning around to look? Why is there no flash reflection in her eyes? These are the questions that have kept this case alive on the internet for over 10 years. Now, let's talk about the official story. Because the Panamanian authorities have a clean, simple explanation for all of this. They say the girls got lost. They wandered for days. They got dehydrated, disoriented, exhausted. Eventually, one of them slipped, fell into a ravine, and died. The other followed soon after. Their belongings were swept downriver during the rainy season. The night photos, just 2 terrified girls trying to use the camera flash as a flashlight to find a way out of the jungle. Tragic accident. Case closed. But hold on a second. Let's actually look at the evidence. Start with the backpack. This is a backpack that supposedly sat exposed in a tropical rainforest for 10 weeks. We're talking torrential rain every single day for over 2 months. Mud, insects, animals, floods. When that backpack was recovered, it was in remarkably good condition. The contents were dry, the cash was crisp, the bras were folded, the phones turned on, the camera worked. Think about that for a second. Leave a backpack in your own backyard for 2 weeks during a normal rainstorm and tell me what condition it's in. Now multiply that by 5 and add jungle wildlife. The pristine state of that bag is, frankly, hard to square with the official story. It almost looks like the backpack was placed there, recently, for someone to find. Now, let's talk about the phones. This is where things get genuinely strange. For the first 4 days after the disappearance, the phones are turned on, the correct PIN is entered, and the girls check for signal. Logical, predictable, exactly what you'd expect from 2 scared but lucid people. But starting on day 5, something shifts. Lisanne's phone dies, and Chris's phone gets turned on again, but the PIN is entered incorrectly. From that day forward, the correct PIN is never entered again, not once. Whoever's interacting with that phone after day 5 is either too delirious to remember a 4-digit code or doesn't know it. And there's an even stranger detail. On day 11 full days after the girls vanished, Chris's phone was switched on for one final time. And during that brief window, system files on the phone were modified. The kind of modification that, according to some forensic analysts, would normally require external hardware, a computer, specialized software. So how does a phone, allegedly soaking in a backpack in the jungle, get its system files modified 11 days into the wilderness? I don't have an answer for you. Nobody does. And then we come back to the photos. 90 flash images in 3 hours. Why? If you're using the flash as a flashlight, you don't need 90 of them. You need 1 or 2. The flash on a digital camera creates a single blast of light. It doesn't help you see continuously. So that explanation has always felt thin. If you're trying to signal a rescue helicopter, that makes more sense. A strobe pattern at night could theoretically be visible from the air. Except there are no helicopters known to have flown over that ravine that night. So what were they signaling, and to whom? Weeks after the backpack was found, search teams went back into that area, and they began to recover scattered remains. A pelvic bone, bleached white, found by the river, identified through DNA as belonging to Chris, and then a hiking boot, discovered separately, with Lisanne's foot still inside it. The bones were so unusually clean, almost stripped, that some forensic anthropologists found it puzzling for a body that had supposedly only been decomposing for a few weeks in the wild. The Panamanian government officially closed the case. Tragic accident. 2 tourists who underestimated a jungle. And maybe that's all this is. Maybe 2 best friends got lost on a beautiful afternoon hike, made one bad decision past the summit, and paid for it with everything they had. Or maybe, just maybe, the 90-night photos, the pristine backpack, the wrong pins, the modified system files, and the hiking boot with the foot still in it are telling a different story. A story that nobody has been brave enough to officially write down. 2 girls walked into a Panamanian cloud forest on a sunny April afternoon. They never walked out. What they left behind, that little blue backpack, that camera, those 90 photographs from the dead of night, is one of the most claustrophobic, unsettling, unsolved mysteries on the internet. And if you ever find yourself standing at the summit of El Pianista, looking down into that green darkness on the other side, turn around, go home. Imagine a world where someone you love walks out the door for a normal morning bike ride, and the only piece of evidence you ever get back is a single Polaroid photograph found in a parking lot 1,500 miles away of a teenage girl bound and gagged in the back of a van. That's not a movie pitch. That's the case of Calico. And tonight, I'm going to walk you through what is arguably the most disturbing photograph in the entire history of American true crime. So pour yourself a drink, get comfortable. Because once you see this picture, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Picture this: Belen, New Mexico, September 20th, 1988. It's a Tuesday. It's bright. It's already warming up to that classic high desert heat where the sun bakes the asphalt and the wind whips little dust devils across the empty roads. Belen is the kind of town where everybody knows everybody. The kind of place where you wave at the guy in the truck driving past, because odds are you went to high school with his sister. This isn't a dangerous place. There's no boogeyman lurking around the corner. This is small-town America. Pickup trucks, Friday night football, and front porch lights left on for the kids coming home late. And on this particular Tuesday morning, 19-year-old Tara Calico is doing what she always does. Now, let me tell you about Tara. She's a sophomore at the University of New Mexico, Valencia branch. She's smart, she's athletic, she's extroverted. She's the kind of girl who has a tennis date scheduled at 12:30 in the afternoon and a college class to get to after that. She's not a drifter. She's not depressed. She's not running from anything. She has a routine. And the routine is this: every single morning, she gets on her neon pink Huffy mountain bike and she rides a 36-mile loop along New Mexico State Road 47, out and back, same route, every day. Sometimes her mom, Patty, rides with her, But on this particular morning, Patty stays home. And that decision is going to haunt her for the rest of her life. At 9:30 a.m., Tara walks her bike out of the driveway. She turns to her mother and says something completely ordinary, something that any 19-year-old would say. She tells her mom, "If I'm not back by noon, come look for me. We've got tennis at 12:30. Think about that line for a second. Hold on to it, because it's important. This is not the language of someone planning to disappear. This is not the language of someone running away. This is a girl scheduling her afternoon. She's got plans, she's got tennis, she's coming home." And then she pedals off into the morning. Multiple witnesses see her along Highway 47 over the next 2 hours. She's cycling steadily. She's wearing headphones. She's listening to her Sony Walkman. Just a normal girl on a normal ride. But here's where it starts to feel wrong. Several of those witnesses notice something else. A truck, a light-colored pickup, mid-1950s style, beat up, distinctive. And it's not just driving past her. It's following her, trailing dangerously close behind her bike, matching her pace. One witness later described it as menacing, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. Then 11:30 a.m. rolls around. Tara should be on her way home. Noon hits, no Tara. Patty gets in her car. She drives the route. She drives it slowly. She's looking for a flat tire. She's looking for her daughter resting on the side of the road. She's looking for anything. She finds nothing. No bike, no body, no daughter, no trace. The police are called. And almost immediately, the searchers start finding little fragments along the side of Highway 47, pieces of a shattered Sony Walkman, a cassette tape scattered across the dirt shoulder. The components are spread out over a stretch of road, not concentrated in one spot. Now, stop and think about what that actually means. A Walkman doesn't just fall off a moving bicycle and explode into pieces along a mile of highway. That's not how physics works. The most common interpretation among investigators? Tara was dropping it. On purpose. Piece by piece, like Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs through the forest. But instead of a forest, it was the empty stretch of an unforgiving desert highway. She was telling someone, anyone, find me. But here's the wait a minute moment. The bike, the pink Huffy that she rode every single day, that bike has never been found. Not in 38 years. Not a frame, not a wheel, not a reflector, nothing. And that's a problem. Because if a vehicle had simply struck her, the bike would still be at the scene. If she'd gotten a flat and walked off, the bike would still be there. The fact that the bike vanished alongside Tara tells you something very specific. Someone, at least one person, possibly more, took the time to load that bicycle into a vehicle, to clean up the scene. That's not panic, that's planning. And then, nothing. For 9 months, absolutely nothing. The trail goes cold. Investigators are stuck. The family is destroyed. The town is haunted. Until June 15th, 1989. Port St. Joe, Florida. A coastal town. 1,500 miles away from Belen, New Mexico. A woman is walking through the parking lot of a convenience store. She glances down at the asphalt and notices something. A Polaroid photograph lying face down on the pavement. She picks it up. She turns it over. And what she sees stops her cold. The photograph shows the inside of what appears to be a windowless white van. The walls are dark. The flash is harsh. Lying on rumpled bedding in the back are 2 people. A teenage girl, maybe in her late teens, and a young boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Both of them are bound. Both of them have thick black duct tape pressed across their mouths. Their eyes are wide open, wide, terrified, pleading directly at the camera lens. Beside the girl, propped up next to her on the bedding, is a paperback book. The title is clearly visible, My Sweet Adrena, by V.C. Andrews. And here's the gut punch. V.C. Andrews was Tara Calico's favorite author. My Sweet Adrena was a book she had read and loved. There's more. The girl in the photo has a long, distinct scar on her right leg. Tara had a scar in that exact spot, in that exact shape, from a serious car accident she'd been in years earlier as a child. And remember the woman who found the photo? She mentioned something to investigators that should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Just minutes before she'd spotted the Polaroid on the ground, she'd seen a windowless white van pulling out of that exact parking spot. driven by a mustachioed man in his 30s. The photo wasn't there before, and then, suddenly, it was. Now, this is the part where I need you to slow down with me, because the police theories on this case are riddled with holes you could drive a pickup truck through. When Tara first vanished, some investigators floated the runaway theory. Maybe she just took off. Maybe she wanted a new life. But think about that for a second. Logically, if you are running away to start over, what do you take with you? You take money, you take ID, you take clothes, you take, at the very minimum, your transportation. Tara took none of that. She left her ID, she left her clothes, she left her family, she left her tennis plans for that very afternoon. And here's the killer detail. She left her bike. Or rather, someone else made sure her bike disappeared. A girl who voluntarily walks away does not arrange for her own bicycle to be erased from a public highway. Why would she? It makes no sense. And then there's the Walkman. If you're voluntarily leaving, you're not scattering pieces of your favorite electronics across the dirt like distress flares. That's the behavior of someone trying desperately to leave a trail that says, I was here, I was taken, find me. So the runaway theory? That falls apart the second you actually look at the evidence. Now let's talk about the Polaroid itself, because this is where it gets really uncomfortable. Where was it found? In a convenience store parking lot, in broad daylight, in a busy public area. The photo was clearly taken from inside the van. So how, exactly, did it end up on the asphalt outside? There are really only two possibilities, and both of them are awful. Possibility one, the kidnapper dropped it by accident. Maybe it fell out of a glove compartment when a door was opened. Maybe it slipped out of a pocket. A mistake. Possibility two, and this is the one that keeps people up at night. It was left there on purpose, as a trophy, as a taunt, as a sick little message to the world. Look what I have, look what I can do, and you can't do anything to stop me. There's no good answer there. Either possibility tells you that whoever took these photos was confident, mobile, and operating in plain sight. And then there's the boy. Who is the boy? For years, the working theory was that he was Michael Henley, a 9-year-old who had vanished from New Mexico right around the same time Tara did. The geographic and temporal overlap seemed too perfect to be a coincidence. But then in 1990, Michael Henley's skeletal remains were found in the Zuni Mountains of New Mexico. He had died of exposure. He had never been kidnapped. He had simply gotten lost on a hunting trip. Which means, if the girl in the Polaroid really is Tara, then the boy beside her is some completely different child. A child whose parents may have never even known to file a connection. A child whose name we may never learn. That detail on its own is one of the darkest unanswered questions in this entire case. So who looked at this photograph? Everyone. The FBI, Scotland Yard at the request of investigators, Los Alamos National Laboratory, 3 of the most sophisticated forensic analysis bodies on the planet. And here's the maddening part. They couldn't agree. Scotland Yard said yes, that's Tara. Los Alamos said no, that's not her. The FBI couldn't decide. So we have 3 official answers, and they are yes, no, and maybe. 3 decades of analysis, and we still don't have a definitive identification of the girl in the photo. Patty Dowell, Tara's mother, spent the rest of her life believing, knowing, that the terrified girl staring out from that Polaroid was her daughter. She died in 2006 without ever getting an answer, without ever finding her child, without ever knowing if Tara survived that van or what happened in the months and years after that camera flash went off. And that's where this story leaves us. A 19-year-old college student went out for a Tuesday morning bike ride on a route she had ridden 100 times before. She had tennis plans for the afternoon. She had a future. And somewhere along that empty stretch of New Mexico highway, on a bright sunny morning, she vanished into a nightmare so complete that the only piece of her anyone has ever recovered is a single Polaroid photograph, lying face down in a parking lot 1,500 miles away. Where's Tara Calico tonight? Nobody knows, and maybe nobody ever will. There's a photograph, sent by an 18-year-old boy to his family on the morning he vanished, and at first glance, it just looks like a typical tourist shot. A rusted staircase, a misty mountain ridge, the kind of picture you'd post to Instagram and forget about. But if you zoom in, just a little, off the trail, half hidden in the dense green foliage, there's a man, crouched, watching, waiting. This is the case of Dahlan Pua. And by the end of this video, I want you to look at that photograph and tell me what you see. Oahu, Hawaii, February 26, 2015. If you've ever seen a photograph of the Hawaiian Islands that made you stop scrolling and say, "I have to go there," there's a good chance you were looking at the Haiku Stairs. Locals just call it the Stairway to Heaven, and the name fits. It is a 3,922-step metal staircase bolted directly into the side of a near-vertical mountain ridge on the windward side of Oahu. It was built by the U.S. Navy during World War II as a way to access a secret radio facility tucked into the clouds. From a distance, the stairs look almost cartoonishly impossible. A thin ribbon of rusted metal climbing straight up a green wall of jungle, vanishing into low-hanging mist. It is, without question, one of the most beautiful hikes on the planet. It is also illegal, and it has been since 1987. The stairway has been officially closed for decades. There are gates, there are warning signs, there are security guards posted at the bottom on most mornings to turn hikers away. The metal itself is rusted and unstable in places. Storms have torn out entire sections. The ridge it sits on is, in some places, barely a meter wide, with sheer 1,000-foot drops on both sides. People have died up there. People have been seriously injured up there. And on this particular February morning, the trail itself was actually impassable due to recent storm damage. So anyone who wanted to reach the top had to take an even longer, even more dangerous back route up the Mauna Lua Ridge. Now, meet Dahlan Pua. Everyone called him Moke. He's 18 years old, a high school senior from the Big Island visiting his grandmother on Oahu for a few weeks. He's a good kid, energetic, fit, a dancer, a singer, the kind of teenager who's full of life and not afraid of much. The night before, he posted on Facebook 3 sentences that, in retrospect, are heartbreaking. He told his friends he was hiking the Stairway to Heaven the next day. He called it an insane hike, and he asked them to wish him luck. His grandmother heard about his plans, and she warned him, begged him actually, told him not to go, told him the stairs were dangerous, illegal, and not worth the trouble. He said okay. The next morning, before the sun was even fully up, he slipped out of her house and caught a bus toward the trailhead. Dahlan took the long way. Because the official approach to the stairs was closed off, he went up the back route, the Mauna Lua Valley Trail, which loops around and connects to the ridge from the opposite side. This is a brutal hike, even for experienced people. We're talking miles of muddy valley trail, then a punishing vertical climb up razor-thin ridge spines where one wrong step puts you in a ravine you'd never climb out of. The wind up there can shift from dead silence to 50-mile-an-hour gusts in seconds. Clouds roll in and out. 1 minute you can see for miles, the next minute you can barely see your own hand. But Dahlan didn't go quietly. As he climbed, he kept texting his grandmother. Picture messages, little progress reports. Look how high I am. Look at this view. Look at these clouds. Each photo showed him deeper into the climb, higher up the ridge, the valley floor getting smaller and smaller behind him, the vegetation getting thicker, the trail narrower. And then around 11 in the morning, he sent his final messages. After that, nothing. No more texts, no more photos, no phone calls, no location pings. His grandmother waited, and waited, and waited. By that evening, when he hadn't come home, she called the police. The search that kicked off the next morning was massive. We're not talking about a small local effort. The Honolulu Fire Department was deployed. The U.S. Navy got involved. Helicopters were in the air. Drones were sent into the ravines. Search dogs were brought to the trailhead. Volunteer hikers, experienced ones, went up the ridge in teams, scanning every inch of brush and rock face. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, nothing. Day 3, still nothing. They scoured the cliff faces. They flew helicopters down into the valleys. They sent drones into spots no human could reach. They listened. They watched. They called his name. And the mountain gave them absolutely nothing. No body, no backpack, no phone, no water bottle, no torn piece of clothing snagged on a branch, no skid mark in the mud, No smashed electronics on a rock face. Nothing. It was as if Dahlan Pua had simply walked into the clouds and dissolved. Eventually, his family did what families do when they're desperate. They went home. They sat down. They opened the text messages, and they started looking at the photographs Dahlan had sent that morning, one by one, hoping for a clue, a landmark, a piece of trail they could point to and say he was here. That's when his uncle noticed something. It was in one of the final pictures, a standard shot. Dahlan had pointed his phone down the trail. The frame showed the rugged green path stretching out ahead of him, framed by dense tropical brush on either side, but off to the side, just barely off the trail, tucked into the foliage. There was a shape. At first you might dismiss it. A weird shadow, a trick of the light, a rock. But the more you stare, the more the shape resolves into something specific. The proportions of a human torso, the suggestion of arms, the vague outline of a head oriented toward the camera, a figure that appears to be crouched or maybe leaning forward, watching. The internet would later nickname it the Shadow Man or the Lurking Man. When the family showed the photo to the Honolulu Police Department, the response was telling. They didn't laugh it off. They didn't dismiss it as pareidolia. Instead, they made a public statement saying that if there was indeed a person in that photograph, that person was now considered someone they wanted to talk to. A potential witness, at the very least. In the decades since, no one has ever come forward. No hiker has said, "Yeah, that was me, I was just resting in the brush." No tourist has stepped forward to clear the air. That figure, whoever or whatever it was, has never been identified. Now let's talk about the official theory, because the simple explanation goes like this. Dahlan slipped, fell off the ridge, tumbled into one of the deep ravines, and died on impact. Tragic, horrible, but not mysterious. But hold on a second, let's actually pull on that thread. When a person falls off a mountain ridge, they leave evidence. That's just how physics works. You fall through the canopy, you snap branches, you leave torn fabric on jagged rocks, you drop your phone, your backpack catches on something, your shoes get knocked off. Within a few days, scavenging birds usually find a body and the activity itself becomes a beacon. For Dahlan, nothing. Not one of those things. The U.S. Navy flew drones into ravines a human could not access. They concentrated their search on the most likely fall zones. Search dogs were given his scent and led to the ridge. And every single one of those resources came back empty. That, by itself, is a logical problem. People don't just vaporize off Hawaiian mountains. Now let's add in the lurking man. Skeptics will tell you it's pareidolia, the classic phenomenon where your brain sees faces and figures in random patterns of light and shadow. And yeah, it's a real thing. It's why we see Jesus in toast and a man in the moon. But the figure in Dahlan's photo doesn't quite fit that pattern. It's not just a face, it's a full-body form, with proportions that match an adult human wearing what appears to be clothing, positioned in a way that does not match anything else in the surrounding vegetation. And here's the part that really matters, the location. The Mauna Lua Ridge is not a casual stroll. It's not the kind of place where people wander off the trail to take a phone call or have lunch on a rock. The off-trail area on either side of that ridge is not flat ground. It's nearly vertical brush clinging to the side of a cliff. To stand or crouch in that exact spot, hidden in the foliage, you don't accidentally end up there. You have to intentionally place yourself there. You have to want to be hidden. And then there's the detail that, honestly, gives me chills every time I read it. A few days into the search, when official efforts were starting to wind down, a separate group of civilian hikers was making their way along the same ridge. The wind, which had been howling for hours, suddenly dropped, and in that pocket of silence, they heard something. A voice, coming up from somewhere in the valley below, calling out. They reported hearing a clear human cry, something like, "I'm down here," and then a series of distressed sounds. They yelled back. The voice responded again. They called 911 immediately. And here's what they were absolutely insistent about. The voice they heard was not coming from any of the rescue teams. The locations of every searcher were known and logged. The voice was coming from somewhere else, somewhere off-grid. When emergency responders arrived and concentrated drones and listening equipment on the area where the cries had come from, they found nothing. The voice was gone. The valley was silent. So which is it? Was Dahlan alive for days down there, injured, calling out into the mist? Was somebody else down there with him? Or were the hikers mistaken, their minds tricking them in the weird acoustics of a Hawaiian ravine? Nobody knows. The official search for Dahlan Pua was eventually called off. His family was left with nothing. No body to bury, no grave to visit, no closure of any kind. Just a phone full of photographs from the morning he vanished, and one of them, that one, with the figure in the brush. The haiku stairs have always carried a certain weight in local folklore. Hikers have reported strange noises up there for decades, phantom voices, lights that shouldn't be there, stories of people who climb up into the clouds and come back somehow. Different. Most of it is exactly the kind of stuff you'd expect from a remote, weather-beaten World War II relic perched on the edge of a Hawaiian sky. But Dahlan's case isn't folklore. It isn't a ghost story. It's a real teenager, with a real grandmother who begged him not to go, a real mountain that swallowed him whole and refused to give back even a single fragment of evidence, a real, named human figure crouching in the foliage of his second-to-last photograph, who has never identified himself in over 10 years. An 18-year-old kid climbed up into the clouds of Hawaii on a misty February morning. He sent his family a few cheerful photos along the way. He waved goodbye to a world he was still a part of. And somewhere along that razor ridge, between the steps and the sky, he encountered something, or someone, that he did not survive. He may never have known it, but there's a real chance that one of those last photos he sent home wasn't just a picture of the trail. It was a picture of the thing that was already waiting for him in the mist. There's a photograph, taken in a quiet backyard in rural Australia on a bright spring morning. A 3-year-old boy in a Spider-Man costume, hands raised like claws, roaring playfully at the camera. About 5 minutes after that photo was snapped, that little boy disappeared from the face of the earth. No scream, no struggle, no torn fabric on a fence, no tiny shoe in the bushes, no tracks leading into the forest, nothing. This is the case of William Tyrrell, and it remains, more than a decade later, the most haunting unsolved mystery in Australian history. Kendal, New South Wales. The morning of September 12, 2014. Kendal is the kind of place you'd put on a postcard if you wanted to advertise rural Australian peace. It's a tiny inland town, a few hours north of Sydney, population in the low hundreds. The streets curve gently between paddocks and gum trees. Everybody knows everybody, the kind of place where you can leave your front door unlocked because, honestly, who would bother coming all the way out here? It's springtime. The mornings are cool, but the sun is climbing. The air smells like eucalyptus. Birds are loud in the trees. It is, by every measurable standard, idyllic. The house at the center of this story sits on a quiet dead-end street called Benaroon Drive. It's a one-story home owned by an elderly woman sitting on a generous grassy property. There's a wooden patio at the back. There's a sprawling yard with shrubs and trees. And just beyond the property line, the land opens up into the Kendal State Forest, a dense, ancient stretch of Australian bushland. It's an absolutely perfect place for kids to play. Big yard, open space, trees to hide behind, a house full of toys. That morning, the property has visitors. A young foster mother is there with her 2 foster children, a 4-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. They've come to spend time with Grandma. The little boy is the one I want you to focus on. His name is William Tyrrell. He's 3 years old. He's energetic. He's loud. He's the kind of toddler who never stops moving. He loves animals. He loves running. And on this particular morning, he loves one thing more than anything else in the world: his Spider-Man costume. It's a full bodysuit, bright red and bright blue. Eyes, web pattern, the whole thing. He'd put it on that morning and refused to take it off. Because he wasn't William today. Today, he was a superhero. By around 9 in the morning, William and his sister are out in the backyard playing hide and seek. The foster mother is watching them from the back patio. Grandma is in the house. It's a normal, sleepy, sunny Friday morning. The kids are running and laughing. William is in full character, leaping out from behind shrubs, growling, pretending to be both Spider-Man and a tiger at the same time. 3-year-olds aren't picky about their crossover canon. At some point, his foster mother lifts her phone. She wants to capture this moment. He looks adorable. He's a flash of red and blue against the green grass in the wooden patio. She takes the photograph. This is the image that's going to be on every newspaper, every news broadcast, every missing child appeal in Australia within 48 hours. And it is genuinely heartbreaking to look at. William is standing on the patio. The Spider-Man suit hangs slightly loose on his small frame. His hands are raised in front of him with his fingers curled, mimicking claws. His face is contorted into a happy little snarl. He's trying to look fierce, like a tiger, but he just looks delighted. You can almost hear the playful roar he was making at the exact moment the shutter clicked. It is pure, undiluted childhood joy. It is a kid pretending to be invincible, and the dramatic irony of that image, once you know what happens next, is almost unbearable to sit with. Because just feet away from where he's standing, just minutes into the future, something terrible was already in motion. A short time after the photo, William and his sister keep playing. The foster mother decides to step inside for a moment to make a cup of tea. The back door's open. She can hear the kids. She's gone for, by her own account, no more than 5 minutes, maybe less. When she comes back out onto the patio, the 4-year-old sister is still there. But the yard is silent. She calls his name. Nothing. She walks to the side of the house. Nothing. She walks down the driveway. Nothing. She runs to the front street, calling out for him. Nothing. The 4-year-old says she heard William imitating a tiger growl, running off toward the side of the house, and then the silence. Within minutes, the foster mother is screaming. Within an hour, half the neighborhood is searching. Within hours, police helicopters are in the air over Kendall. William Tyrrell has, in the span of less than 5 minutes, vanished from a sunny suburban backyard. Now let's pull this apart, because the natural assumption, the very first thing your brain wants to do when you hear this story, is to picture a little boy wandering off, getting lost in the bushland behind the house, a tragic accident. That's also what police initially assumed, so they ran with it. Within hours, hundreds of volunteers, professional search and rescue teams, K-9 units, helicopters, and police were swarming the bushland behind Benaroon Drive. They didn't just look. They scoured, they cut through the brush, they flew low over the canopy, they walked grids meter by meter. But hold on a second, let's actually use some logic here. A 3-year-old boy has tiny legs, tiny strides. A toddler that age, running flat out on flat ground in a controlled environment, can cover maybe 100 meters before he gets tired and stops. That is being generous. In thick Australian bushland, full of ferns, fallen logs, undergrowth, and uneven ground, that distance shrinks dramatically. He'd be tripping, he'd be crying, he'd be calling out for the only adults he trusts. So in 5 minutes, even at maximum velocity, William could not realistically cover more than 200 meters or so, and probably much less. That's a small, contained search radius. That's an area you can cover thoroughly on foot in an hour, with dogs, with heat-seeking equipment, with dozens of people. And it gets more impossible from there, because of what he was wearing, a Spider-Man costume. Bright red, bright blue. We are talking about colors that are physically engineered to stand out. They do not exist in nature. There is no such thing as a fluorescent red gum tree or a royal blue fern. In the green and brown palette of the Australian bush, that Spider-Man suit is essentially a neon sign saying, "I am here, I am here, I am here." If William had been lost in those woods, the helicopters that were in the air within hours of his disappearance would have spotted him from a mile away. A flash of red against green is exactly what aerial search teams are trained to look for, but they didn't see him. Not that day. Not the day after, not the week after, not in over a decade of searching. Because he wasn't there. And here's the detail that, for me, closes the case on the wandering off theory entirely. When police brought in tracker dogs, highly trained K-9 units, given items of William's clothing to lock onto his scent, the dogs went to work. They cast around the yard. They picked up his scent. The trail did not go into the bushland. The dogs followed William's scent in the yard, then around the side of the house, then down the driveway. and the trail stopped abruptly at the road in front of the property. It just ended, right there, at the curb. There's really only one way that happens. William didn't walk into the bush. He walked, or was carried, into a vehicle. And that vehicle drove away. In silence, in broad daylight, on a quiet residential street, without a single neighbor seeing or hearing a thing. Now let me put one more chilling detail on top of that. That morning, multiple neighbors on Benaroon Drive, a sleepy little dead-end street where everyone notices a car they don't recognize, reported seeing two unfamiliar vehicles parked on the road. A gray or green sedan and an older-style station wagon. Both cars had a window rolled down. Neither had any apparent reason to be on a dead-end street. Neither driver had any reason to be there. And to this day, neither vehicle has ever been definitively identified. There was also a sighting, earlier that morning, of a sedan driving down Benaroon Drive, executing a U-turn at the dead end, and leaving. Like someone scoping out the street, watching, counting kids in yards. Whoever took William didn't get lucky. They were waiting. They were watching. They knew there was a small child on this property, and the moment that mother stepped inside to put the kettle on, 5 minutes, maybe less, they moved. That is not a moment of opportunity. That is a window of opportunity that someone had been studying. In the years since William's disappearance, the search for him has become one of the largest and most expensive in Australian history. Police set up a dedicated investigation called Strike Force Roseanne. Tens of millions of dollars have been spent. Cadaver dogs, geomorphologists, soil scientists, and forensic anthropologists have all been brought in. Sections of bushland have been physically dug up and sifted, layer by layer, in case scavengers had scattered remains. Theories have come and gone. For years, police pursued an abduction theory, convinced that an organized predator had taken William, possibly part of a wider network. They chased leads across multiple states. Then, in recent years, the official investigation pivoted entirely. Detectives controversially shifted their focus to the Foster family itself, suggesting William may have died in a tragic accident on the property and that someone close to him panicked and disposed of the body. This theory is hotly contested. It does not, in any clean way, account for the unfamiliar cars on the street that morning. It does not explain the sighting of the sedan doing a U-turn. It does not entirely satisfy the scent trail evidence. What it does have in common with every other theory is this: it has produced no body, no remains, no clothing, no Spider-Man suit, nothing. 11 years on, William Tyrrell remains gone. And his foster mother, the woman who stepped inside to put the kettle on, has lived every single day of those 11 years in a public spotlight no parent should ever have to endure. The most painful part, though, is the photograph. That image of a 3-year-old in a Spider-Man costume, hands raised in claws, roaring at the camera, is now permanently woven into the Australian national consciousness. Every parent in the country has looked at that picture and felt their stomach drop. Because that picture is not just a happy memory, it is a frozen instant of innocence, the very last instant before something unimaginable reached out and took him. He was 3 years old. He had pretended to be a superhero that morning. He had been laughing, he had been playing hide-and-seek with his sister, and then his mother stepped inside the house, just for a moment, just long enough to boil a kettle. And when she came back out, the silence in that yard was the loudest sound in the world. Somewhere on Benaroon Drive, in the seconds after that photograph was taken, a door closed on a vehicle that nobody can identify, driven by a person nobody has ever found. And that person carried away a little boy in a red and blue suit who, in the last image we have of him, was pretending he was strong enough to save anybody. He just couldn't save himself. There is a window of time, roughly 10 minutes long, on a freezing dark stretch of road in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, and inside that 10-minute window, a 21-year-old woman named Mora Murray walked away from her crashed car and never came back. No footprints in the snow, no body in the woods, no phone signal, no witnesses, no trace, just an empty Saturn sedan with the doors locked and a rag, strangely, stuffed into the tailpipe. This is one of the most unsolvable disappearances in modern American history. And it all comes back to 10 minutes. Tonight, I want to walk you through them. February 9th, 2004. New England in the dead of winter. If you've never spent a February in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, let me set the scene for you. We're talking the kind of cold that hurts. Single-digit nighttime temperatures, black ice on the roads, snowbanks piled 6 feet high on either side of every rural highway, courtesy of the plows. The sun goes down before 5, and by 7 o'clock, the world is pitch black. The kind of dark where your headlights only really illuminate a tunnel of falling snow in front of you, and beyond that, nothing. The specific stretch of road that matters here is Route 112, also called the Wild Ammonoosuc Road, near a tiny village called Woodsville. It is rural in the way that only northern New England can be rural. Towering pine trees press right up against the asphalt. There's no cell reception, no streetlights. The houses are spread far apart, set back from the road. If you broke down out there at night, you would feel like the only person on Earth. That is the geography that's about to swallow Mora Murray. Now let me tell you about Mora. Because on paper, she looks like a kid you'd never expect to vanish. She is 21 years old, a senior nursing student at UMass Amherst. She's a star athlete, a former track and field record holder. She had previously been a cadet at the United States Military Academy at West Point, which is not something normal people just do. She scored in the 95th percentile on the SAT. By any measure, Mora Murray is a high-functioning, high-achieving young woman with a future. But here's the thing. Underneath all that polish, Mora was unraveling, quietly, steadily, painfully. She'd been struggling with disordered eating. Her family had been going through some difficult dynamics. Her long-distance boyfriend, an Army officer, was stationed in Oklahoma. She'd had an emotional meltdown at her campus security job a few days earlier. And just 36 hours before she vanished, she'd crashed her father's brand new Toyota into a guardrail on the way back from picking him up at the airport. The pressure on Mora in early February of 2004 was enormous, and it was about to find an outlet. On the morning of February 9th, Mora starts setting up her exit. At 1:24 in the afternoon, she sends emails to her professors and her work supervisors. The emails say there has been a death in her family. She'll be out for the week. She's sorry for the inconvenience. There is no death in the family. None. It is a complete, calculated lie. Now think about that for a second. This is not the behavior of a panicked, impulsive young woman. This is somebody buying themselves runway. Somebody making sure that nobody would come looking for her at school or at work for at least 7 days. Whatever Mora was doing, she was deliberately giving herself a head start. Around 3:15 p.m., she stops at an ATM in Hadley, Massachusetts, and she withdraws $280. That sum is significant. It is essentially every dollar she has. She drains her account, and it's here that we get the chilling media. The ATM camera captures her in still black and white frames, and these images have haunted internet sleuths for over 20 years. In the photographs, Mora is staring slightly off camera. She looks completely, utterly exhausted. Heavy, dark shadows pool under her eyes. Her face is hollow, her hair is pulled back. She's wearing a light-colored, almost white athletic jacket with dark stripes on the sleeves. She doesn't look like a girl about to start a fun adventure. She doesn't look giddy or excited. She looks like someone who has not slept in days. She looks haunted. Some analysts have looked at those shadows under her eyes and argued they're not just exhaustion. They're consistent with bruising, the kind of bruising you might get from an airbag deployment. Remember, she'd crashed her father's car less than 2 days earlier. So here's the question this image asks. Was she running from something? Or running to something? You can't tell from her face. All you can tell is that she is not okay. About 30 minutes later, she stops at a liquor store called Liquors 44. She buys around $40 worth of alcohol, vodka, Kahlua, Bailey's, and a box of wine. Then, she gets in her black 1996 Saturn sedan, and she drives north, into New Hampshire, toward the mountains, toward a destination that, to this day, nobody has ever been able to identify. At 7:27 p.m., a Woodsville woman named Faith Westman is sitting in her house on Route 112. She hears a loud thump outside. She looks out her window, and she sees a small black car nose down in the snowbank just past a sharp curve in the road. Mora has crashed. The car has hit a tree. The airbag is deployed again. There's a strong smell of alcohol, partly because of the wine that is splashed across the interior. The Saturn is undrivable. A few minutes after the crash, a local school bus driver named Butch Atwood comes around the bend on his way home. He sees the wrecked Saturn. He pulls over. He gets out and approaches the car. Inside, he finds Mora. She is shaken but conscious and uninjured. Atwood asks if she's okay. He offers to call the police, or AAA, for help. And here's where Mora makes a choice that, in retrospect, is incredibly revealing. She tells Butch Atwood, "No, please don't call the police. I've already called AAA." That was a lie. A very specific, very deliberate lie. Because there is no cell service in that part of Route 112. There is, in fact, no cell service for miles in any direction. Mora could not have called anyone. She had to know that. And so did Butch. Atwood, no fool, drove the rest of the way home, walked into his house, picked up his landline, and called 911. It is now somewhere between 7:36 and 7:42 p.m. Officer Cecil Smith of the Haverhill Police Department arrives at the crash site at 7:46 p.m. The car is empty, the doors are locked, the keys are gone. Inside the car, police find Mora's textbooks, some clothing, the wrecked airbag, and the spilled box of wine. There's also a strange detail that has confused investigators ever since, a rag of some kind partially stuffed into the tailpipe. But Mora herself, gone. In the 10 minutes, maybe less, maybe 12 at the absolute outside, between when Butch Atwood drove off and when Cecil Smith pulled up, Mora Murray vanished. Now let's pull this apart because every theory about what happened to Mora runs into a wall almost immediately. The most popular early theory was the drunk walkaway. The idea goes, Mora had been drinking. She didn't want a DUI on her record because it would have ended her nursing career. So when she crashed, she panicked and ran into the woods to hide from the police. Then, she got disoriented in the dark, succumbed to the cold, and died of exposure somewhere out in the trees. Sounds plausible. Until you look at the actual ground. There had been fresh snow. The snowbanks bordering Route 112 at that crash site were several feet high and completely undisturbed. When search teams and tracking dogs were brought in shortly after, they could not find a single footprint leading from the road into the woods. Not one. You cannot walk into a forest in winter without leaving tracks. You can't levitate over the snowbank. You can't tiptoe through 3 feet of powder without leaving any sign. And yet, nothing. In fact, when a tracking dog was given Mora's scent from one of her gloves found in the car, the dog followed her trail east down Route 112, staying on the pavement for about 100 yards. And then, in the middle of the road, the scent simply ended. Stop and think about what that means for a second. The scent doesn't trail off into the woods. The scent doesn't double back. The scent stops dead. In the middle of the asphalt, there is really only one way that happens. Mora got into a vehicle. Okay, so let's try the second theory. Maybe she planned to disappear. Maybe she was running toward a new life. She did empty her bank account. She did pack a bag. She did lie to her professors. All of that is consistent with somebody planning an exit. But hold on. If you are masterminding a clean disappearance, do you crash your car into a snowbank in the middle of nowhere? Do you leave your packed bags, your textbooks, your school papers, your cosmetics, all locked inside that car? Do you abandon the entire physical infrastructure of your getaway and walk into a forest? The crash itself shatters this theory. A planned disappearance doesn't include a wrecked Saturn full of your personal belongings, parked in a ditch in front of a witness's house with a 911 call already in progress. Whatever Mora was doing, she was not executing a clean disappearance. The crash was not in the plan. Which leaves us with the third darkest theory, that somebody happened to drive past in those critical 10 minutes and either offered her a ride or forced her into their vehicle. Now think about this in terms of pure probability. It is 7:40 p.m. on a Monday night in February, in a desolate stretch of rural New Hampshire, on a road where most of the local traffic has already gone home for the day. The temperature is below freezing. The roads are slick. What are the odds that a predatory stranger, one specifically inclined toward violence, just happened to be driving past that exact crash site in that exact 10-minute window when a young, vulnerable woman was standing beside her wrecked car? Astronomically low, but not zero. And critically, it is the only theory that actually fits the evidence. The missing footprints, the scent ending on the pavement, the locked car, the speed of the disappearance. So either Mora got staggeringly unlucky in the most cosmic sense imaginable, or somebody knew she was going to be there. The disappearance of Mora Murray essentially birthed the modern internet true crime community. There are entire podcasts dedicated to her case. There are books. There are documentaries. There are forums where people have spent 20 years debating the rag in the tailpipe, the white jacket in the ATM photo, the contradictory accounts of what she was wearing, the unexplained drive into New Hampshire. There are theories about an ex-boyfriend, theories about an online stalker, theories about a serial predator known to operate in the area, theories about a tandem driver, someone she might have been meeting in those woods, theories about every kind of foul play you can imagine. But after 20-plus years of searching, by professional investigators, by the FBI, by private detectives, by amateur sleuths obsessed with her case, there is still no body, no bones, no clothing, no trace of any kind. Her bank account never touched again, her email never logged into, her social security number never used, her face never spotted on a single security camera anywhere in the world. After that ATM still in Hadley, she didn't just disappear. She evaporated. A young woman with an enormous future, the West Point cadet, the track star, the nursing student, was crumbling under pressure no one fully understood. She emptied her bank account. She lied to her professors. She drove north into the freezing mountains for reasons that have never been explained. She crashed her car into a snowbank in front of a stranger's house, and in the 10 minutes between when one witness drove away and another arrived, she was gone. Whatever happened to Mora Murray on that dark stretch of Route 112, whether she walked into someone else's car willingly, or was forced, or chose some third path none of us have imagined, the woods of New Hampshire have kept their secret for over 2 decades. And every February 9th, when the snow falls quietly on the wild Ammonoosuc Road, there are still people out there searching. For her, for an answer. For 10 minutes that nobody can explain. There is a piece of CCTV footage from a 7-Eleven in Victoria, British Columbia. 20 seconds of grainy, fluorescent-lit nothing. A young woman buying a prepaid credit card. But if you watch it carefully, and I mean really watch it, you see a person who is absolutely terrified. Not of something inside her own head, of something outside. Outside the glass, out in the dark. A few hours after that footage was recorded, Emma Filipof disappeared off the face of the earth. And the most haunting part of this entire case, she was standing right in front of the police when she did it. Victoria, British Columbia, November 28, 2012. If you've never been to Victoria, let me set the scene for you. It's the capital of British Columbia, sitting on the southern tip of Vancouver Island. It's a postcard city, cobblestone walkways, old colonial architecture, a massive harbor with float planes coming and going. And right at the center of downtown, there's the Fairmont Empress Hotel, this enormous ivy-covered century-old building that looks like something out of a Victorian novel. In the summer, Victoria is gorgeous. In late November, it's something else entirely. By late November, Victoria has slipped into its dark season. The sun sets before 5. The sky stays a low, oppressive gray for weeks at a time. The maritime wind cuts straight through your jacket. And the rain is constant. We're talking 7 degrees Celsius, around 45 degrees Fahrenheit, with a steady drizzle that soaks everything it touches. It is a cold place to be alone. And on this particular evening, 26-year-old Emma Filipof was very, very alone. Let me tell you about Emma. She was originally from Perth, Ontario, a small town on the other side of the country. She'd moved out west in search of something, a new beginning, a new self. Emma was bright, artistic, creative. She'd worked as a chef. She loved photography. People who knew her described her as gentle, quiet, a little introverted, the kind of person who'd rather be reading in a corner than the loudest voice at the party. But in the weeks leading up to that November evening, something inside Emma had started to shift. Her phone calls home became erratic, tearful, frightened. She'd call her mother in Ontario and beg her, please come get me, I need to come home. And then minutes later, she'd call back and tell her, no, don't come, stay where you are, don't get involved. She talked about being watched, about being followed, about people who weren't who they said they were. She started avoiding the homeless shelter where she'd been staying. She moved her van, which contained pretty much every possession she owned, to a different parking garage. She told friends she didn't feel safe. She was unraveling. And from thousands of kilometers away in Ontario, her mother Shelley was watching it happen with growing horror. By November 28th, Shelley had heard enough. She booked a flight. She was going to fly across Canada that day, land in Victoria that night, and bring her daughter home. But she was racing a clock she didn't fully understand. That morning, Emma made one final phone call to her mother, and her last words were 9 words that have haunted Shelley ever since. I don't know how I can face you. Then she hung up. What Emma did over the next several hours is, frankly, hard to make sense of. She left the Sandy Merriman House Women's Shelter in the early evening. She purchased a prepaid cell phone. She got into a taxi and asked to be taken to the airport. But then, partway through the ride, she suddenly told the driver she didn't have enough money for the fare, which is strange because she did have money. She got out of the taxi, she wandered into a 7-Eleven, and it's here that we get the most haunting visual document in this entire case. The CCTV footage from inside that 7-Eleven on Government Street is short, but it tells you everything you need to know about the state Emma was in. You see her enter. She walks up to the counter. She purchases a prepaid Visa card, a $200 prepaid credit card, the kind people use when they don't want a transaction tied to their real identity. She's holding it in her hand. Now think about that for a second. She told the taxi driver she couldn't afford the fare, but minutes later, she's spending $200 on a prepaid card. That's not the behavior of someone who's broke. That's the behavior of someone who didn't want to be in that taxi anymore. Something, or someone, had spooked her. But here's where the footage really starts to dig under your skin. After she completes the transaction, she walks toward the front door. And she stops. She doesn't leave. She just stands there, in the bright fluorescent light of the store, staring out into the dark, rainy parking lot. She paces. She walks back deeper into the store, then forward again, toward the door. She peers through the glass. She steps back. She does this for several minutes. Her body language is unmistakable. She's not stalling because she's confused. She's not lingering because she's bored. She is acting like an animal that knows there's a predator waiting outside the den. She keeps checking the parking lot. She keeps angling her head to see different parts of the street. She keeps stepping back, pacing, looking again. This is not a woman who is simply having a mental health crisis. This is the body language of a woman who genuinely, viscerally believes that the second she walks through that door, somebody is going to grab her. Eventually, she walks out. And here's a detail I should mention. By this point in the night, in the freezing November rain, Emma is barefoot, just bare feet on a wet Canadian sidewalk in 45-degree weather. Shortly after she leaves the 7-Eleven, an acquaintance spots her standing barefoot on the corner near the Empress Hotel. She looks distraught. She looks lost. She looks frightened. He calls 911. 2 Victoria police officers respond to the scene. They make contact with Emma. And what follows is, in my opinion, the single most frustrating moment in this entire case. These 2 officers stand on the street in the rain, with Emma, barefoot, clutching a prepaid credit card, completely shaken, and they conduct an interview. For 45 minutes, they ask her questions, she answers them. According to the officers, she answered mostly in monosyllables. Yes. No, I'm fine, I'm fine. She was evasive, she was clearly distressed. But at the end of those 45 minutes, the 2 officers made a decision. They determined that Emma was not a threat to herself, not a threat to others, and not legally apprehendable under the Mental Health Act. They let her go. They watched her walk away barefoot into the rainy darkness of downtown Victoria. And that was the last verified sighting of Emma Filipof. Forever. A few hours later, her mother Shelley landed at Victoria International Airport. She rushed to the shelter. She rushed to every place Emma was known to frequent. Emma was already gone. Now, let's pull this apart, because the official narrative on this case has so many holes you could drive a truck through it. The police explanation has always been some version of the same thing. Emma was suffering from a mental health crisis. She was not legally detainable, and unfortunately she wandered off and likely succumbed to the elements somewhere remote. But hold on a second, let's actually use our common sense. You have a 26-year-old woman. She is barefoot on a downtown street corner in November in British Columbia. She is visibly distressed. Someone has called 911 about her. 2 professional officers spend 3/4 of an hour with her. She's so unwilling to engage that she answers in single syllables. And the conclusion is, she's fine to walk away. I'm not a cop, I'm not a clinician, but somewhere in the basic instinctual part of the human brain, the alarm bell should have been ringing the entire time. A barefoot woman in freezing rain who refuses to make eye contact and gives one-word answers is not fine. That's the first logic gap. Here's the second. The easy explanation for Emma's behavior is mental illness, paranoia, hallucinations. And maybe that's part of the picture. There's no doubt she was in some kind of crisis. But look back at that 7-Eleven footage. Watch her body language, the pacing, the peering through the glass, the deliberate patterned scanning of the parking lot. That is not random. That is not internal. That is the behavior of someone reacting to something specific, something they think is out there, in a particular place, at a particular angle to the door. You don't pace and check sightlines because you're seeing things in your head. You pace and check sightlines because you think there is a person with a body located somewhere outside your line of sight. That distinction matters a lot. Was Emma seeing things that weren't there? Maybe. But maybe she was seeing things that were. And then we come to the third logic gap, the one that, honestly, throws this entire case into chaos. In May 2014, a year and a half after Emma vanished, a missing persons poster of her was hanging on the wall inside a clothing store in the Gastown neighborhood of Vancouver. There was a $25,000 reward attached to that poster. A man walked into the store, saw the poster, walked over to it, and ripped it off the wall. The store owners, understandably alarmed, asked him what he was doing. The man's response, on CCTV, was casual, almost annoyed. He told them, and I'm summarizing the gist of his statement here, that the woman on the poster wasn't actually missing. He said she was his girlfriend, that she'd run away from her family because she didn't get along with them, and that she didn't want to be found. Then he walked out of the store, casual as anything. The encounter was caught on the store's security camera. Police later released a sketch. To this day, that man has never been identified. He has never come forward. He has never been ruled in or out as a suspect. Now think about that for a second. Logically, if he was telling the truth, that he was Emma's boyfriend and she'd voluntarily disappeared to escape her family, then Emma is alive, somewhere, with this guy. And we just got our answer to the case, except we have no idea who he is. But if he was lying, if he just walked into a store, ripped down a poster of a missing woman, and casually fabricated an entire story about being her partner, then he is, at minimum, somebody who knew Emma, or who was watching her case, or who had a reason to want her face off that wall. And the most haunting interpretation? Maybe he is the very man Emma was looking for in that 7-Eleven parking lot. Days after Emma vanished, her red Mazda van was found in a parking lot in downtown Victoria. Inside that van was almost everything Emma owned: her passport, her ID, her camera, her laptop, her clothes, her journals, her bedding, her library card. Think about what that tells you. Someone running away to start a new life takes their passport. Someone planning a rarely abandons their journals and camera and ID in a tidy little cache. The van was essentially Emma's whole world, and she left every part of it behind. Shelley Filipof has spent over a decade searching for her daughter. She has put up posters, hired investigators, spoken at vigils, written articles, begged the public for information. Massive ground searches have been conducted in the wooded areas around Victoria and Esquimalt. particularly after a 2018 tip from a man who claimed he gave a barefoot woman, matching Emma's description, a ride in the early morning hours of November 29th. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Volunteers combed the brush. Nothing has ever been found. No body, no clothing, no footprints, no phone signal, no bank activity, no social media, no fingerprint at a border crossing. A young woman cried out for help. She stood on a freezing street corner, barefoot in front of two police officers. She told them, with her body and her silence and her terrified eyes, that something was very, very wrong. And we let her walk away into the dark. Wherever Emma Filipof is tonight, alive or otherwise, she carried her secret with her, and the only thing she left behind for the rest of us is 20 seconds of grainy 7-Eleven footage of a young woman staring out a glass door, afraid of something we still cannot see. There is one photograph in this case, just one. A single flashlit frame captured by an off-duty police officer at the scene of a head-on collision in rural Montana. Caught in that flash, looking back over her shoulder toward the camera, is a woman. Her face is completely blank. No fear, no panic, no pain, just a vacant, hollowed-out stare that seems to look straight through the lens and into nothing at all. Seconds after that photograph was taken, the woman climbed over a wooden fence and walked into the dark Montana prairie. She has not been seen, verifiably, since. This is the case of Patricia Mian, and it is one of the strangest disappearances in American history. Picture this: Eastern Montana, April 20th, 1989. Just past 8 p.m. If you've never driven across eastern Montana at night, let me try to describe what that landscape actually feels like. It is enormous. It is empty. The horizon stretches further than your brain knows how to process. The sky is so dark that the stars look closer than the streetlights of the next town. There are no streetlights. There are no streetlights for miles in any direction. The specific stretch of road in this story is Highway 200, near a tiny ranching community called Circle. The population of Circle is something like 600 people. The next town in any direction is half an hour away. Highway 200 is a 2-lane ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through endless rolling prairie. At 8 p.m. in April, the temperatures had been mild during the day, somewhere in the 50s, but they were dropping fast. By midnight, it would be below freezing. The vibe of this road, at this hour, is total isolation. If your car broke down out here, you would not see another headlight for an hour, maybe more. But on this particular night, 2 vehicles were about to occupy the same patch of asphalt at the same time, and one of them was driving in the wrong lane. Now let me tell you about Patricia. Patricia Mian was 37 years old. Originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but for a few years now she had been living in Bozeman, Montana. She loved animals, loved them. She had moved out west specifically to work with horses and livestock, taking jobs as a ranch hand because the lifestyle of the open prairie spoke to her. By every account, Patricia was quiet, hardworking, kind, the kind of person who'd rather be in a barn than at a party. But in the months before April 20th, something inside Patricia had been quietly fracturing. Friends and her landlord noticed her getting more withdrawn, then, alternately, suddenly hyper and erratic. She had been struggling with deep depression. She had been mourning the fact that she didn't have children, a sense of life passing her by. She had been acting, in the words of those who knew her, not herself. A few days before the crash, she had abruptly packed a few things into her car and driven away from Bozeman. She didn't say where she was going. As far as anyone could tell, she didn't know either. By the night of April 20th, she was nearly 400 miles from home, on a highway in the wrong direction, driving a car on the wrong side of a dark rural road. A woman named Carol Heights was driving down Highway 200 that night. Carol was a local. She knew this stretch of road well. She was driving at a normal speed, headlights on, minding her own business in the empty Montana darkness. Out of nowhere, a pair of headlights appeared in front of her, in her lane. There was no time to do anything, no time to swerve, no time to brake. The vehicles collided head-on with the sickening metal-on-metal violence that defines high-speed wrecks. Carol's car stopped dead. The other car, Patricia's, caromed off into the shoulder. Carol survived, barely. She was conscious but trapped in the wreckage of her own car, badly injured, dazed, in shock. What happened next is the part of this story that nobody can explain. Patricia climbed out of her own wrecked vehicle. She was, somehow, almost entirely uninjured. No major bleeding, no broken bones that anyone could see. She was on her feet. She was walking. She walked toward Carol's car. Now think about what should have happened here. Two normal, healthy adult human beings who have just survived a head-on collision typically do one of two things. Either they panic, they scream, they cry, they shake, or they go into emergency mode. They check on the other driver, they look for a phone, they wave down a passing car. Patricia did neither. She walked over to Carol's car, she bent down slightly, and she just looked at her, through the glass, in total silence. Carol later described it as one of the most disturbing moments of her life. She was bleeding, in pain, trapped, and on the other side of the window was a woman who had just caused this disaster, staring at her with no expression at all. No words, no apology, no urgency, no emotion of any kind, just a blank, empty look. After what felt like a long time, Patricia turned away from the car. She started walking. Here is where pure coincidence enters this story. An off-duty police officer happened to be driving along Highway 200 that night. He saw the wreckage. He pulled over. As he approached the scene, he did what officers are trained to do when arriving at a crash. He documented it. He raised a flash camera and took photographs, and by sheer luck, in one of those photographs, he caught Patricia. The image is one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in any missing persons file. The flash punches into the dark prairie night. In the foreground or middle distance is Patricia Mian, mid-stride, walking away from the crash. She has glanced back over her shoulder, just slightly. Her eyes are open. Her face is fully illuminated by the flash. And there is nothing there. That's the only way to describe it. Her expression is completely empty. No fear, no pain, no confusion, no remorse, no flicker of recognition that another human being is standing nearby with a camera. It is the face of someone whose internal lights have gone out, a body in motion, a face vacated. Her parents would later say that the woman in the photograph did not look like their daughter, not physically, but spiritually, as if Patricia herself was no longer behind those eyes. The off-duty officer called out to her, tried to get her to stop, to wait, to get medical attention, to answer some questions. Patricia ignored him completely. She walked to the edge of the road. She climbed over a wooden roadside fence, and she stepped down into a soft dirt field on the other side. She walked into the dark Montana prairie, and she kept walking. That was the last verifiable second that anyone with a name and a badge ever saw Patricia Mian. Now let's pull this apart, because every theory about what happened next runs straight into a wall. The most natural assumption is that Patricia was concussed. She had probably suffered a serious traumatic brain injury in the head-on collision, even if she wasn't visibly bleeding. Brain injuries can cause exactly the kind of vacant, unresponsive behavior that Carol Heitz and the off-duty officer both witnessed. Under that theory, Patricia wandered into the field, kept walking, eventually collapsed somewhere, and died of exposure as the temperatures dropped overnight. Sounds reasonable, until you look at the search. Within hours, that prairie was being scoured. By the next morning, full search and rescue operations were underway. Tracker dogs, helicopters, horseback teams, ATVs, hundreds of trained searchers covering thousands of square miles of open ground over the following weeks. The dogs picked up Patricia's scent at the fence line and tracked her for about half a mile across the field. And then the scent stopped. Just stopped. In the middle of the field, no road, no river, no fence, just dirt and grass and emptiness. In that field, in those weeks, no body was found, no clothing, no personal effects, no watch, no shoe, no scrap of fabric. Even abandoned coal mines in the area were inspected. Nothing. Now think about that for a second. Eastern Montana is enormous, but it is not magical. People who collapse and die of exposure in open fields don't vaporize. They get found by ranchers, by cattle, by hunters, by the scavengers that congregate around remains. Even if the body itself is consumed, the bones are usually scattered locally and recovered within months or years. Patricia? In 35 years, not a single bone, not one. So if she didn't die in that field, the alternative is that someone picked her up, maybe a passing trucker on Highway 200, just out of sight beyond the search perimeter. Maybe a passing motorist who saw a dazed woman walking the shoulder a few miles down the road. But hold on a second. Let's apply common sense. It is the middle of the night, on a stretch of road where another driver has just caused a head-on collision. You are driving along and you see a disheveled woman walking along the shoulder, alone, with no apparent destination. Do you stop? Maybe. Some people would. But here's the harder question. After you stop and pick her up, after you presumably learn, from her or from a radio bulletin, that she might be connected to a crash a few miles back, after you spend time in your car with this woman who is silent and vacant and unable or unwilling to explain who she is, do you just never tell anyone? Forever? For 35 years? That's the wall the hitchhiker theory runs into. Most people, given that scenario, would eventually call it in, even if it took a few days, even if just for their own peace of mind. Unless the person who picked her up didn't want anyone to know, which opens its own dark set of doors. But here's where this case stops being a missing persons case and starts being a legend. Because over the next several years, after Patricia disappeared into that field, the Mian family started receiving sightings. A lot of sightings, thousands of sightings. Reports came pouring in from across the Pacific Northwest, from Washington State, from Oregon, from Idaho, from Minnesota, reports as far away as Alaska and Hawaii. Truckers, waitresses, store clerks, all describing the same thing. A short, blonde, disheveled woman matching Patricia's description, wandering rural truck stops and roadside diners, sometimes mumbling to herself, sometimes staring blankly, sometimes asking strange, disoriented questions. A few of the sightings were unusually credible. There was a waitress in Washington who described serving a customer who matched Patricia's appearance perfectly, height, age, eye color, and who told her when asked that she didn't know who she was or where she had come from. Dissociative fugue is a real, documented psychiatric condition. It is rare, but it exists. In a fugue state, a person experiences a complete loss of personal identity. They forget who they are. They sometimes invent new names, new histories. They can travel huge distances on autopilot, drifting from town to town, with no memory of their previous lives. If anything could trigger such a state, it would be a brutal head-on collision, paired with the deep depression and erratic behavior Patricia had been displaying for months before the crash. Did Patricia Mian, in the moment of that impact, simply lose herself? Did the woman in the photograph stare back at the camera because there was no longer anyone home behind those eyes? Did she walk over that fence, not as Patricia Mian, but as a blank slate, ready to drift across the American highway system as an unrecognizable ghost? It is impossible to prove, and it is impossible to disprove. The Mian family chased every credible sighting they could. They drove to truck stops, they put up posters, they contacted authorities in every state where reports had come in. They spent decades hoping that one of these reports would finally turn into a confirmation. None ever did. Patricia's parents both passed away without ever finding their daughter, without ever knowing whether she lay in some forgotten patch of Montana grassland, scattered by the elements, or whether she lived out a strange, anonymous existence under a different name in some quiet corner of the country, never knowing who she really was. The photograph from the crash site, that single flashlit frame of a woman looking back over her shoulder, has become one of the most chilling images in missing persons history. There are no security cameras in this case, no CCTV, no social media, no digital trail of any kind. Just one accidental photo, taken by an off-duty officer who had no idea what he was capturing. A woman caused a devastating crash on a desolate stretch of Montana highway. She climbed out unscathed. She stared silently at her victim through a car window. She turned her face into a camera flash with an expression so vacant her own family didn't recognize it. She climbed over a fence, and she walked into a dark field. If she died out there, the prairie has refused to give her up. If she lived, she has refused to come back. Either way, somewhere between Highway 200 and the rest of her life, Patricia Mian disappeared from the inside out, and the only thing she left behind was a flashlit photograph of a stranger wearing her face. There's a piece of grainy CCTV footage from a bank camera in Dublin. It's 23 years old, and in it you can watch, frame by frame, a young man being hunted. He doesn't know it. He's just walking home from a Christmas party, trying to keep his umbrella from flipping inside out in a once-in-a-decade storm. He has no idea that 30 seconds behind him, matching his stride, is a hooded figure who has been waiting in the freezing rain for half an hour. This is the case of Trevor Deely. And I'm going to warn you up front, this one stays with you. Dublin, Ireland, the early hours of December 8th, 2000. If you've ever been to Dublin in December, you know it's not exactly a sun-soaked vacation destination. It's cold, it's wet, the days are short, the pubs glow warm and yellow, and the streets glisten under the rain. But this particular night was something else entirely. December 8th, 2000 saw one of the worst winter storms to hit Ireland in years. We're talking torrential sideways rain, wind gusts hitting 60-70 miles an hour, hurricane force by some measures. Trees were coming down across the country, the kind of weather where the sensible thing to do is bolt your door, put the kettle on, and not even think about going outside. To make matters worse, that same night, every single taxi in Dublin was off the road. There was a citywide taxi strike, so if you were out late, you were walking home, in the rain, in the wind, in the dark. The streets of Dublin were essentially deserted, not empty, but emptier than you'd ever normally see them in the middle of a Friday night. Just the occasional figure leaning into the wind, fighting with an umbrella, trying to get home. One of those figures was 22-year-old Trevor Deely. Let me tell you about Trevor, because the more you know about him, the harder this case becomes to accept. He was a young IT professional at Bank of Ireland Asset Management. He had a good job, a steady girlfriend, a tight-knit family. Friends described him as the absolute opposite of trouble. No enemies, no criminal history, no drug problems, no debts, no gambling habits, no sketchy associates. He was, by every account, a genuinely nice, dependable, slightly nerdy young guy who loved his job and his family. That night, he was at his office Christmas party. The party started at the Hilton, then moved to a nightclub called Buck Whaley's on Leeson Street. He'd been drinking, but not heavily. Multiple co-workers later confirmed that Trevor was lucid. He was chatting normally. He wasn't slurring. He wasn't stumbling. He was, in their words, completely fine. Around 3:30 in the morning, he decided to head home. Now, here's where Trevor's responsibility kind of breaks your heart in retrospect. It is hammering rain outside. He has a long walk back to his apartment in Ballsbridge. He's wearing a wool coat that's already soaked through. He has a small umbrella with him from earlier in the evening, but it's not really cutting it against the storm. So he makes a decision, a perfectly logical decision. His office, the Bank of Ireland building, is right on his route home. There's a big, sturdy company golf umbrella sitting at his desk. Why not stop in, dry off for a minute, grab the better umbrella, and finish the walk? He walks to the back security gate of the bank. He calls internal security on the intercom to be let in. And while he's standing at that gate, in the howling rain, something strange happens. A man approaches him. The man is dressed entirely in dark clothing, a dark jacket, a hood pulled tight against the storm. His face is obscured. He says something to Trevor, we don't know exactly what, and the two of them have a brief exchange right there at the gate. Then the security guard buzzes Trevor in, and Trevor goes inside. Once inside, Trevor does something that, in hindsight, is almost unbearable to think about. He has a cup of tea with the security guard. He logs onto his work computer for a few minutes. He checks his email. He even types out a little to-do list of tasks for Monday morning, the behavior of a sober, rational, future-oriented human being who fully expects to be alive on Monday. He makes one final phone call from his cell at 4:06 a.m. to his best friend Glenn, a cheerful little voicemail saying he missed him at the club, he's heading home, talk to you tomorrow. Then he grabs the big golf umbrella, opens it against the rain, and walks back out into the storm at around 4:02 a.m. He has approximately 12 minutes left as a person the world can see. Now we need to talk about what the cameras captured, because this is where the story stops being sad and starts being terrifying. There are two relevant pieces of CCTV footage in this case. The first comes from the Bank of Ireland's own security cameras at the back gate. When investigators reviewed this footage in the days after Trevor's disappearance, they saw something they could not initially make sense of. That man in dark clothing, the one Trevor briefly spoke to at the gate, had not just casually wandered up. He had been there for half an hour. Read that again, half an hour, in hurricane-force winds, in freezing, lashing sideways rain, in a city where no rational human being was outside if they didn't absolutely have to be. This man was standing in the doorway of a building down the street from the bank, pacing slightly, hiding behind a pillar at one point, just waiting, watching the gate, for 30 straight minutes before Trevor ever arrived. This is not the behavior of someone caught in the rain. This is not someone seeking shelter. There were countless better places nearby. This is the behavior of someone with a very specific reason to be at that very specific spot. When Trevor finally arrived at the gate, the man emerged from the shadows and approached him. They spoke. Trevor was buzzed inside. And then the man waited some more. Now let's go to the second piece of footage. This camera is mounted on the wall of the AIB Bank on the corner of Bagot Street Bridge and Haddington Road. It's a fixed camera pointed down the rainy street. At exactly 4:14 a.m. into the frame walks Trevor Deely. He's struggling with the big golf umbrella. The wind is fighting him. You can see him hunched into the storm, leaning forward, trying to keep moving. He walks across the camera's view and he disappears off the right side of the frame. Then there is silence. Empty street, rain hammering the asphalt, and then, at 4:14 and 30 seconds, almost exactly 30 seconds after Trevor exits the frame, into the shot walks the man in dark clothing. His hood is pulled tight, his face is obscured, he's walking briskly, purposefully, in the exact same direction Trevor went, matching Trevor's stride, matching Trevor's path. He doesn't pause. He doesn't look around. He doesn't shelter from the rain. He just powers forward, pacing through the storm, on the same trajectory as Trevor, about 30 seconds behind. And then he too walks off the right side of the frame. After that point, no camera ever sees Trevor Deely again. No camera ever sees the man in black again either. Now let's pull this apart. Because for many years, the official theory on Trevor Deely's disappearance was, frankly, kind of lazy. The route Trevor was walking took him near the Grand Canal and further along near the River Dodder. Both of these waterways were swollen and dangerous that night, so the early working theory from investigators was a simple one. Trevor was tipsy, the rain was blinding, the wind knocked him off balance, he slipped near the canal, fell in, and drowned. But hold on a second. Let's actually look at this. The Garda dragged the canal, they sent divers down, they used sonar, they searched the riverbanks. They have over the years conducted multiple major excavations and water searches looking for any trace of Trevor. In 23 years, they have found exactly nothing. No body, no clothing, no personal effects, no phone, no wallet, and, perhaps most significantly, no umbrella. That big, bright, distinctive golf umbrella that he'd specifically gone out of his way to retrieve, never recovered anywhere. And here's the bigger problem with the drowning theory. It completely, totally, willfully ignores the man at the pillar. Let me ask you something. If you genuinely believe that a young man got drunk, slipped, and fell into a canal during a storm, how do you square that with the fact that 30 minutes earlier, a stranger was standing motionless in hurricane-force winds outside that man's office building? You can't. The two don't fit together. One of those things has to give. Now let's talk about the man in black himself. And let's use our common sense here. It is the middle of the night. It is the worst storm Dublin has seen in years. The streets are deserted. There's a citywide taxi strike, meaning even the most chaotic late-night travelers are walking, not loitering. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was casually hanging out outside that bank for 30 minutes for an innocent reason. There is no innocent reason. He wasn't waiting for a friend. He wasn't waiting for a bus. He wasn't taking shelter. He was waiting at a specific access point, behind a specific pillar, in a position of concealment, until somebody came out. Was he specifically waiting for Trevor? Or was he waiting for anyone, for any random employee of the Bank of Ireland to walk past so he could carry out whatever he had planned? We don't know. And honestly, both possibilities are horrifying in their own way. But there's a third logic gap that needs to be addressed. And it's the one that, for a lot of investigators, hints at organized intent rather than random violence. If this man attacked Trevor somewhere down a Dublin street between the AIB camera and Trevor's apartment, he had to do it cleanly. He had to overpower a sober, healthy 22-year-old man. He had to do it without leaving witnesses, even though the city had other people walking around. And then he had to dispose of the body, and the umbrella and the phone and every single piece of clothing in such a thorough way that 23 years of professional investigation hasn't turned up a thread of fabric. That is not a panicked mugging. That is not a fight that got out of hand. That is something planned, calculated, possibly assisted, which suggests that the man in black wasn't just some opportunistic predator waiting in a storm. He may have been part of something larger. In 2017, after years of public campaigns and a €100,000 reward, the Garda commissioned an enhanced forensic analysis of the CCTV footage. Better algorithms, better software, better resolution. And the analysis came back with a definitive answer to one question that had haunted the case for years. The man pacing back and forth outside the bank's pillar at 3:30 in the morning and the man following Trevor down Haddington Road at 4:14 were definitively, conclusively, the same person. Same gait, same build, same clothing, one man waiting in the storm for 30 minutes for Trevor. Despite this confirmation, despite massive nationwide publicity, despite multi-million euro searches, despite every modern forensic tool, despite a generation of police officers working this case, that man has never been identified. Not by name, not by face, not by association. He just exists in those few frames of grainy black and white CCTV footage, walking briskly through the rain, 30 seconds behind a young man who had no idea he was being followed. Trevor's family has spent over 2 decades waiting for an answer that will probably never come. His parents, his sister, his brothers, his friends, they've held vigils. They've kept his face on posters across Ireland. They've begged anyone with information to please come forward. Anything, even an anonymous tip, even a deathbed confession. Nothing. A nice young man left his Christmas party in a storm. He stopped by his office to grab an umbrella so he wouldn't get too wet on the walk home. He typed out a list of things to do at work on Monday. He stepped out into the rain, and somewhere, less than half a mile from the safety of his own front door, the city of Dublin swallowed him whole. The last image we have of him is 12 seconds of footage, a young man fighting a golf umbrella against the wind. 30 seconds later, into the same frame, walks a shadow. And whoever that shadow was, he is, almost certainly, still out there. Probably watching this case from a distance, probably thinking about Trevor every December 8th when the rain comes back to Dublin. And he is the only person on earth who knows what happened next. There is a piece of grainy security footage from the lobby of a Wisconsin water park resort, just a few seconds long. A 6-year-old boy with a Spider-Man backpack standing patiently next to his mother at a checkout counter, shifting his weight, looking around the lobby, bored the way kids get bored. It is the last verified image of Timothy Pitzen. That little boy was about to be erased, completely, permanently, and by the only person on earth he trusted unconditionally. This case has been sitting on cold case desks for over a decade, and the most chilling part is that the woman who orchestrated it left behind a note that was less a confession than a taunt. You will never find him. So far she's been right. Aurora, Illinois, the morning of May 11th, 2011. It is one of those completely unremarkable Wednesday mornings that defines suburban American life. The sun is up. The lawns are getting their first real spring green, sprinklers ticking, coffee brewing, backpacks getting zipped, cartoons playing in the background of 100 kitchens. In one of those kitchens, in one of those Aurora houses, a father named Jim Pitzen is getting his 6-year-old son ready for school. The kid's name is Timothy, and by every account, He is exactly the kind of kid you'd want to know. Timothy is in kindergarten. He's bright, he's energetic, he's silly, he loves Spider-Man. Like, really loves Spider-Man, in the way only 6-year-olds can. He has a Spider-Man backpack, he has Spider-Man pajamas, he has a Spider-Man lunchbox. He's the kind of boy who, if you handed him a Chuck E. Cheese token, would think you'd given him a piece of treasure from a king's vault. Jim drives Timothy to Greenman Elementary that morning. He pulls up. He says goodbye. He tells his son he loves him. He watches Timothy hop out of the car, shoulder his backpack, and run toward the front entrance. That is the last time Jim Pitzen will ever see his son. Less than 30 minutes after Jim pulls out of the school parking lot, a woman walks into the front office of Greenman Elementary. The school staff recognize her. They greet her by name. She is Amy Fry Pitzen, Timothy's mother. Amy tells the secretaries that there's been a family emergency. She needs to pull Timothy out of class for the rest of the day. The school does what schools do. They check the boxes, they sign him out, they walk to his classroom, and they bring Timothy down to the office. He is, of course, delighted to see his mom in the middle of the day. Mom equals fun. Mom plus skipping school equals an unbelievable jackpot. There is no family emergency, none at all. The story is a complete deliberate fabrication. What there is instead is a plan. A plan that Amy has been working on by some accounts for months. A plan she has driven the route for, twice, in advance. A plan she is now executing. And that plan starts with a road trip. For the next 3 days, Amy and Timothy are on a tear. From the outside, it looks like the dream surprise vacation. She takes him to the Brookfield Zoo. They wander the exhibits. She buys him whatever he wants. They take photos. She drives him north to a place called Key Lime Cove, an indoor water park resort. He swims, he rides slides, he giggles in chlorinated tropical-themed pools. Then she drives him further north into Wisconsin to a sprawling resort called the Kalahari. It's an enormous indoor water park with hotels attached, lazy rivers, slides, arcades, neon lights, the works. To a 6-year-old, it is heaven. Throughout these 3 days, while Timothy is having literally the best time of his short life, Amy's phone is ringing constantly. Jim is calling. He's terrified. He's confused. He doesn't know where his wife and son have gone. He is calling Amy's family. He is calling the police. Amy answers a few of those calls. She tells family members, vaguely, that they're safe, that they're on a little trip. She lets Timothy say hi. He chatters happily about being hungry, about the rides, about the things he's seen. Then she stops answering altogether. Because somewhere underneath all of this, underneath the joy on her son's face, Amy Fry Pitzen has decided. She's been losing her grip for years. She has documented mental health issues. She is, at the time, locked into the early stages of a contentious divorce. She is convinced, utterly, irrationally convinced, that the family courts are going to take Timothy away from her. She has decided that if she can't have him, no one will have him. But not in the way you might be thinking. The morning of May 13th, 2011. The Kalahari Resort, Wisconsin Dells. The hotel's front desk security camera captures Amy and Timothy at the checkout counter. The footage is short, maybe 15 seconds, but every frame of it is unbearable to watch in retrospect. Timothy is standing right next to his mother. He's wearing a t-shirt and shorts. His Spider-Man backpack is slung over his shoulders. He's small, really small, barely tall enough to see over the counter. He shifts from one foot to the other. He looks around the lobby. He glances up at his mom. He pulls at the strap of his backpack the way kids do when they're tired of being still. Just a normal, slightly bored, perfectly happy 6-year-old waiting for the grown-up part of the morning to be over so the next round of fun can begin. He has no idea. He has no idea that his father has reported him missing. He has no idea that the police are looking for him. He has no idea that his mother has been driving with a plan that does not include a return ticket. He has no idea that this lobby, this fluorescent-lit generic hotel lobby with its potted plants and its checkout kiosks, is the last public place that the world will ever see him. The footage ends. They walk out together. Timothy presumably climbs into his car seat. Amy presumably starts the engine. And then, for the next several hours, Timothy Pitzen disappears from human knowledge. There are phone records that suggest they were still together for a stretch of the afternoon. Then, there's a long, blank window. Many hours, unaccounted for. Then, at 7:25 p.m. that evening, another security camera, this one in a family dollar store in Winnebago, Illinois, captures Amy. She is alone. No backpack, no Spider-Man child, no Timothy. She is buying a pen, some notepaper, and envelopes. A few hours after that, she checks into a cheap motel in Rockford, Illinois, the Rockford Inn, alone. The next day, around noon, a housekeeper opens the door to her room and finds her. Amy has taken her own life. Beside her body is a handwritten note. It says, in essence, that she is sorry for the pain she has caused, that Timothy is safe, that he is with people who will love him and care for him. And then comes the line that has haunted investigators for over a decade. You will never find him. Now let's pull this apart, because the central horror of this case is that there are two completely opposite theories about what happened, and both of them have evidence supporting them. Let's start with the optimistic version, the version Timothy's father has held onto for years. The note is true. Amy gave Timothy to someone. He is alive somewhere, being raised by another family. But hold on a second. Let's actually think through the logistics of that. It is 2011. Hiding a 6-year-old child in modern America is staggeringly difficult. To pull off a clean, invisible handoff of an actual living person, you need infrastructure. You need a broker. You need a recipient family that's willing to risk federal kidnapping charges. You need somebody willing to homeschool him forever, because he can't be enrolled anywhere. His face is on every milk carton, every Amber Alert, every news bulletin. You need somebody willing to never take him to a doctor, never let him post a photo online, never let him be photographed at a school dance or a graduation. That is a huge ask. That is an underground network. And Amy Fry Pitzen, by every account of her life, was not a member of any underground network. She was a working mom in suburban Illinois. She wasn't connected to a cult. She wasn't connected to a religious sect that does this kind of thing. The investigators went through her finances forensically. There were no large unexplained wire transfers, no mysterious cash withdrawals, no coded emails, no suspicious phone numbers in her records. So how exactly did a woman with no apparent network manage to hand off a child to people who will love him in the span of a single afternoon? That is the first logic gap. But here is where it gets cruel, because there is also evidence that supports the optimistic theory. When investigators searched the motel room and Amy's car, they noticed something significant. Timothy's Spider-Man backpack was missing, his clothes were missing, his favorite toys were missing. Anything that was uniquely his, gone. Now ask yourself this: if you had done the unthinkable, if you had killed your own child, why would you bother packing up his toys and disposing of them separately? You wouldn't. The toys would still be in the car. The backpack would still be in the motel. Toys go with the child. If the toys are missing, that suggests the child went somewhere with them. So that's a thread of hope. A real one. And then comes the second logic gap, the dark one. When forensic technicians examined Amy's SUV, they found the undercarriage caked in fresh mud. Tall grass, plant matter, wet weeds. The kind of debris you only get if you've driven a vehicle off-road into an isolated area, a meadow, a riverbank, a remote field. Forensic botanists analyzed the plant matter and narrowed it down to a region in northwestern Illinois. Somewhere with a stream, somewhere green, somewhere isolated enough to drive into without being seen. That detail can support either theory. Maybe Amy met someone in a remote field, handed Timothy off, drove away, left no electronic trail, or maybe she drove into that field for an entirely different reason. And what she left behind in that meadow is what investigators have been searching for, in vain, for over a decade. To this day, that exact location has never been found. Police have searched fields, they've searched waterways, they've consulted maps. The meadow with the stream remains unidentified. Years passed. And then in 2019, the case got cracked back open in the cruelest way possible. A teenage boy showed up in Newport, Kentucky, claiming to police that he was Timothy Pitzen, that he had escaped his captors, that he needed help. The story exploded across national news. Jim Pitzen's phone rang off the hook. For about 36 hours, an entire grieving family allowed themselves to hope. And then DNA testing came back. The boy was not Timothy. He was a 23-year-old with a long history of fabricating identities who had seen the case on a TV show and decided to pretend. It is hard to describe how devastating that hoax was, to get the call, to believe for a single day that your son might be coming home, and then to have it ripped away again. Jim Pitzen has, by every account, never moved on. To this day, he keeps Timothy's bedroom in the family home exactly as it was on the morning of May 11th, 2011. The same bedspread, the same toys, the same Spider-Man posters on the wall, the same little kindergartner's universe, frozen at age 6, waiting for an owner who hasn't come home in 15 years. A trusting little boy, happy, well-loved, with a father who adored him, was pulled out of school under false pretenses by the one person in the world he trusted most. He was given 3 perfect days: the zoo, the water parks, the slides, the arcade tokens, a surprise vacation more wonderful than any he could have imagined. And then he stood in a Wisconsin hotel lobby, adjusted his backpack, walked outside with his mother, and vanished. Whether Timothy Pitzen is alive somewhere, growing up under a different name, with no memory of the father waiting for him, or whether he's been lying for 15 years in a quiet meadow in northwestern Illinois, only one person ever knew. And she made absolutely sure she took the answer with her. You will never find him. So far, so far.